The reason I laugh when people say, like, where do you get your ideas is you almost never have one idea. You have like 12 ideas and you mash them together and they make a book. You know, like Infernal Devices, I was like, well, it's a love triangle, but not a love triangle, and it's in London, but they're also huge clockwork machines. I just like all that stuff. You know, I was like, mash it together. So, you know, and in this case, what I wanted to set a book in Los Angeles. I was really sort of fascinated by the idea of the West Coast shadow hunters and how they would be different and what it would be like, you know, being a shadow hunter in LA. But also, I was really fascinated by the idea of sort of Julian and Emma's specific situation, which was how does the war that ends the Mortal Instruments affect the people who are children then? People who lost their parents, people who lost their families in this war. And I've always been sort of fascinated by stories of refugees and people who have had their lives changed by some massive event. And so I thought, well, in this case, you know, Julian has lost both of his parents, Emma has lost both of her parents. How does this change them? What does it mean to be forced into a position, as Julian is, of being an adult when you're only 12 years old, and suddenly you have 5 kids to take care of, and you have a whole institute to run that no one's going to help you with. You have all these secrets to keep. How does this change you as a person? So I was fascinated also by the idea of writing a big family and the family dynamics of that, because I'm an only child, so I don't even know what it'd be like to have 1 brother or sister, let alone like 6 brothers or sisters. So I was sort of like, I think, brought together all of those ideas. So I was like, aftermath of a war, the aftermath of kind of a really dangerous law being passed, which is the Cold Peace, and what does it mean for this family and these kids to have grown up in this situation where they had to become adults much too soon.
Are there any, you know, plot developments that surprised you, like you were like dead set on it's going to go this way and then it ends up going a complete different direction?
There were a couple different things. The cohort, our evil-doing friends in Lord of Shadows, they always existed, but they had a smaller role. And then they kind of came out and wound up having a much bigger role, I think influenced by current politics that we are dealing with now. Sometimes you feel like the only way you can deal with things that are happening in the world is to kind of subsume it into your work or your art. And I felt like there was stuff that I wanted to say and that I could say it through, you know, having the cohort be these bigger villains. And also there's this is in Queen of Air and Darkness, so I don't want to spoil it for you, but there is a whole middle section of Queen of Air and Darkness that actually was different than what I thought it was going to be. There's a part where all the characters travel to a place we've never been before. It's called Thule. And I can't really say anything much about it, but initially it was a completely different idea. And then I was sitting in my barn with my friend Kelly Link, who is a lovely writer. She has written a couple of the Ghost of the Shadow Market stories with me. She's also a crazy genius. She has like a Pulitzer. She won the MacArthur Genius Award. I don't know why she hangs out with me, but she does. And I was like, I have this idea, but it's not like quite falling into place. And so she kind of turned around and she said like 3 words, and I was like, that's it. That's exactly what it's supposed to be. Oh my God. And like 2 hours later, I had sketched out like the entire thing and like everything I wanted. And sometimes you just have an idea that snaps into place.
What do you do when you do get stuck on a plot point? Like you talk to friends, obviously, but you know, and then how else do you get over writer's block?
I couldn't get over it without my friends. I have a really tight group of writer friends. Holly Black. Yeah. That's right. Kelly. Sarah Reese Brennan. Also Maureen. My friend Robin Wasserman. And usually, we work together pretty much every day. Some of us don't all live in the same place, but you know, we communicate remotely. And so I think that for me, when I get stuck on something, I immediately kind of go to my critique group and I'm like, I'm stuck on this thing. Can we talk through it? And honestly, like the best thing, okay, you've all seen House, right? So you get House and he's got some guy who's got spraying blood out of his eyes like a toad. And he's like, I got a guy who's spraying blood out of his eyes. Let's get all the doctors together and they're going to come up with a whole bunch of different potential solutions. So they're like my doctors on House. I'm like, okay, everybody, let's get together. I have a problem. Everybody start coming up with random solutions. So we'll just start like talking and saying stuff and like throwing it, you know, Jace becomes a frog. That's right. Simon's a penguin. It's going to be amazing. It's like the movie Madagascar. Everyone's a penguin. And I'm like, okay, that maybe not that, you know, and they're like, they're all in jail, it's a jail thing, and it's like Orange is the New Black, and we're just like throwing potential possibilities, you know. Jace designs a cat calendar. I'm like, could happen. There's actually, a cat calendar did make its way into Queen of Air and Darkness because of one of these things, so there is a cat calendar. I know, right? I love cat calendars. So, you know, so we're all kind of like, they're coming up, you know, we basically just brainstorm, and eventually one of those things either is the right idea or kickstarts the right idea. The way the characters are created, the most important thing in the world to Julian and also to Emma is family. And the most important thing to Julian in the world is taking care of his brothers and sisters. The thing he is the most scared of is something happening to one of them. When you create a character that has a greatest fear, you have to make that greatest fear happen. It's like Chekhov's gun, you know, there's a gun on the mantelpiece at the beginning of a play, it's going to have to go off by the end of the play. So it's like a rule of drama. So I was like, well, okay, Julian, this is his greatest fear, this is the thing he's most afraid of. So, and it kind of is the thing that almost the whole family is the most afraid of because they've lost so much already. And they're not prepared to lose, really, they're not prepared to lose somebody else. And so this huge loss is what propels kind of all of the action of Queen of Air and Darkness. And I think it's the book that, of all of my books, is the most about grief and grieving and making meaning out of death and loss. That doesn't mean there isn't any funny stuff. There's a cat calendar. And Kieran gets really obsessed with the cat calendar, but they don't have them in Fairy. And he's like, oh my God, there's a cat every month. And then in December, there's 2 cats. Mine is blown. Anyway, so like I'm saying, you know, there's some more lighthearted stuff, but like I feel like you know, these characters have to process what happened, and it is in that processing of this thing that has sort of appended their lives, that all of their lives are changed. And we write books to write about how people change. You know, a character who stays static isn't interesting, and you always ask yourself the question. It's one of like the first questions I think that we ask as writers when we sit down to write a book. It's why now? Why do I join this character now? I've made up a character, but why am I joining them on this particular moment, on this day, in their life? What's changed? How are they going to change? Why am I writing about today and not some other day? So I think for me, that death, it was the why now.
So what was it like to, you know, focus in on the fairy world this time around?
Oh my God, yeah, no, it's true. It's sort of like, TMI kind of covers like vampires and warlocks more closely, and like, not so much fairies because I've always been a little bit scared of writing about fairies. There's so much mythology about fairies. People take, you know, people take it very seriously. Like it's part of, you know, the fairy mythology is part of many cultures, and it's a very significant folklore. And fairies are very formal, and they also have that thing where they don't lie, which makes them really irritating to write. Because they can't even, you know, if like someone's like, do I look, you know, does these jeans make me look weird? They can't be like, no. They have to be like, and you're like, it's really difficult to write characters who can't prevaricate or flatter or, you know, who mislead in very complex ways. You know, when they say something that is misleading, it has to be very carefully worded. So you're always with fairies working with very careful use of language. And so I was always like, Holly's been writing fairies for years, and I've been there helping her with the fairy books and working on the fairy books, and you know, just the way she helps me, you know, we work on each other's books, and I was always like, these fairies drive me bananas. Why can't they just say what they mean? And I was always making fun of her, like, you know, I'm like, they can't just be like, you know, oh man, I'm so tired. They have to be like, oh, I die upon the green sward, oh, love to go, and then she was like, it's not funny. And so finally I was like, well, the really terrible thing has happened to me. I've had this idea for a whole series, but it's about fairies. I mean, it's like primarily they are the main downworlders in this series because of the cold piece and because Mark and Helen, the Blackthorn kids, are half fairy. And just a lot of the action also takes place in fairies, how the story developed. And she was like, I think she actually dedicated Cruel Prince to me, and she was like, this is for Cassie, who has finally like had to write about fairies, ha ha ha. Like, look in there, it's like on the front page. So she obviously got a lot of joy out of that. But actually, once I got into the writing about fairies and the sort of like creation of like spinning off what I knew about my fairy world into a bigger world and actually getting to go to fairy and see what it was like, because we never had done that before. We had visited the court of the Seelie Queen, but we'd never really gone past that into the actual world of fairy. I got really into it and I started to really love it, and being able to, and reading all the fairy mythology was really rewarding and fun, and I got to kind of play off that in a number of different scenes, and eventually I got to a place where I actually really love writing about fairy.
Do you ever feel pressured to change a storyline, especially like now you're going to go back and like rewrite an entire situation because of the response? But do you ever feel pressure to change a storyline because of, you know, what people like are like want to see happen?
I mean, not really. I'm a very stubborn person, but also, I mean, I feel like writers write best when they write the story they want to tell. And even though, you know, sometimes I, you know, start off all the time, I see people saying, oh, I wish this would happen, or I wish this character would be focused on more. I'm like, well, but that's not the story I want to tell. That's not my story. It's what my friend Libba Bray calls, why is this cat my cat and not some other cat? It's got to be my cat, you know? So it has to be the story that I want to tell and that I'm enthusiastic about. I can't force myself to be enthusiastic about a story that I don't care about. So I try to hone in on, you know, the things that make me excited and fulfilled as a writer. And also, I feel like one of the things that's both, you know, a little scary but also rewarding about social media and being, you know, interactive with your fans is that you see all their opinions, which is good because you see all their opinions, but it's also bad because you see all their opinions. But none of them agree with each other anyway. And so I'm like, well, it's impossible for me to change a story to please people, because if I change it to please these people, then these people will be unhappy. Right? So I'm like, there's no, like, people want different things, and that's normal. As readers, we connect to different pieces of a story. And that is actually the way it should be, because hopefully a story offers us enough different pieces that different people can connect in different ways. So it's always going to be normal for people to connect more strongly with different sections of a story. You know, there's always going to be the person who reads Harry Potter and is like, why is this not the story of Professor McGonagall? That is all I ever wanted. And you're like, all right, you know, like, that's like, okay, that's what you connected with. That's totally fine. But, you know, the author still has to write the story that they're connected to. And so I think that, you know, the fact that there's no like one agreement about how the story should go anyway means there's no real way for me to change the story in order to please people, because people aren't a monolith. They don't all have the same opinion. So since there's no pleasing everybody, I might as well just do what I think is the best thing for the story. I love characters that are sort of morally gray and that have a certain flexibility in their moral code that lets you be surprised by the decisions that they make. And I've even sometimes been surprised by the decisions that Julian has made. So I think, yeah, it makes him, he's an interestingly difficult protagonist to write, but also really rewarding. Writing from the point of view of people who are already Shadowhunters and yet trying to make the book comprehensible to new readers, I had to think of it as sort of like a high fantasy. You know, like as if you were writing Game of Thrones and you're like, okay, we're in this world, it's not a secret world, this is the world that these people have grown up in, this is their normal. You know, Westeros is their normal, and in this case, being a Shadowhunter is their normal. And so this is the only world they know. I did use Kit a little bit as an intro character to kind of like give a little bit more perspective from the outside on Shadowhunters. So what I did was I ran the book to critique people who had never read another Shadowhunter book. And I was like, give me a list of questions that you have about the Shadowhunter world and things you don't understand when you're done. And so they did that, and it was actually kind of surprising what they didn't understand. And I was like, okay, look, this is the stuff that I need to fill in and kind of explain more and make people understand that, you know, that I take for granted. So that was really interesting.
I sometimes will look at my story and then I will have no motivation. Like, I literally don't know what to write next. Like, I will look at it and just like blank slate. So I guess my question is, have you ever faced that, and if you have, like, how do you get past that sometimes?
Well, I mean, yes, I think we all have that, oh God, I don't want to go on feeling.
Every single day.
Yeah.
Literally every single day I sit there and I'm like, I'm gonna go get coffee now. Bye.
Done with life. I walk into the sea. I start a new life under the sea with my friends, SpongeBob. Yeah, no, I mean, we all experience that lack of motivation, and it often comes with the feeling that you want to start something different. Don't do that. What you will wind up with is 16 things that you have started, and you have not finished any of them. And, well, I mean, I'm helped along now in my life by having deadlines and terror of my editor. So, you know, I have to finish things or she'll come and kill me. But I also, I mean, it is, oh man, it is one of the hardest parts of writing, just to keep going. And one of the things I think that can help is to set yourself a word count. And just be like, I'm going to write 500 words every day on this story. And 500 words is not that much. It really isn't. And so you can sort of feel like, I can do that. It's a manageable goal. I'm just going to do that. And you will eventually have a story. And once you have finished a story, you will be like, I finished a story, so I know I can finish it, and the next one will be incrementally easier to do. I will say that having, you know, written several books, you get to a place where you're like, I finished before, I will finish again, even if it feels impossible right now. So I think set yourself small goals that you can achieve that will get you to have finished. And then once you have finished a couple of times, you will feel more like this is something I can actually do. And for me, like when I've worked with like lots of people who want to be writers, and the one thing that I have noticed that makes a difference in terms of who becomes a published writer is they finish. That's it.
All I have is characters. I don't know what to put them in a plot. So what's your advice for me on that? I write scenes with them, but I don't know how they all connect.
Okay, so what you're basically doing is kind of character work. You're putting your characters in scenes and the characters are kind of talking to each other, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, what you're doing is working out how these characters relate to each other. So it's not a totally, you know, you're not wasting your time. You know, a lot of times we do that as sort of an exercise to just try to figure out how do these characters talk to each other? Who are they? How do they relate to each other? What's their relationships? But, you know, you will eventually run out of, you know, scenes to write with the characters. I remember Holly telling me once that initially Tithe was just a lot of elves sitting around, like, drinking coffee and experiencing ennui. And I was like, yeah, that kind of happens to all of us in the initial part where we're figuring out, what's this world? How does it work? Who are these people? How do they relate to each other? So I would say you want to ask yourself maybe like 3 big questions. I would ask yourself the why now. Why am I joining these characters now? What has changed? What has changes for these characters right at this minute when this story starts? Because something changes. Every story starts with something changing. And I would say, ask yourself, what does each character want? What do they want more than anything? That's your want line, and you're gonna think about that with everything that you do. Does this, you know, advance what my character wants? How is what my character wants driving this story? Because it is the desires of the character that push all stories forward. And then I would say that the third thing that you want to ask yourself is my character going to get what they want? You know, are my characters going to get what they want, or are they not going to get what they want? Is this a heroic drama, or is this a tragedy? So those are the 3 questions I would ask yourself to kind of get yourself into a place where you are moving forward. And if you know what your character wants more than anything, your character will push you forward through the story.